Step right up, ladies and gentlemen, step right up. Behind this curtain lies a world of wonder, a collection of human marvels the likes of which you've never seen. The strange, the unusual, the bizarre. For just a dime, you can gaze upon living, breathing miracles and monsters. This was the call of the sideshow, the irresistible lure of the freak show. It was a world that captivated millions, a cornerstone of entertainment for over a century. But beneath the glittering lights and painted banners, behind the showman's dazzling smile, lies a history far darker and more twisted than any of the fabricated monsters on display. This is the story of how human beings were bought, sold, and marketed as spectacle. It's a story of exploitation and survival, of staggering cruelty and surprising agency. What happens when our deepest curiosity collides with our darkest prejudices? The history of the freak show holds the uncomfortable answer. Before P.T. Barnum turned human curiosity into a multi-million-dollar industry, the practice of exhibiting people with physical differences was already ancient. It wasn't about entertainment, it was about power. In the courts of ancient Rome and Egypt, emperors and pharaohs kept collects of individuals with dwarfism or other unique physical traits. These people were known as prodigies or marvels of nature, and their presence was a status symbol, a living testament to the ruler's vast reach and command over even the most unusual aspects of the world. They were often treated as pets or court jesters, their lives defined by the amusement and whims of their powerful patrons. This tradition continued through the medieval and Renaissance periods in Europe. Kings, queens, and wealthy aristocrats adorned their courts with these human curiosities. They were simultaneously prized and dehumanized, living ornaments in a gilded cage. But as societies shifted, so did the venue. The spectacle moved from the private courts of the elite to the public squares and raucous fairs of the common people. Early traveling menageries began to include not just exotic animals, but exotic humans as well. These were the humble beginnings of the sideshow, but it would take a marketing genius, a man with no moral compass and an unparalleled understanding of public desire, to transform it into a global phenomenon. That man was Phineas Taylor Barnum. P.T. Barnum didn't invent the freak show, but he perfected it, sanitized it for the middle class, and sold it to the world. In 1841, he purchased a dusty, failing museum in New York City and transformed it into Barnum's American Museum, a palace of wonders that would become the most popular attraction in the United States. It was a chaotic, dazzling mix of natural history exhibits, taxidermy animals, a live aquarium, and theatrical performances. But the museum's beating, breathing heart was its collection of human curiosities. Barnum's first major success was a sickening preview of his methods. He presented an elderly, blind, and partially paralyzed enslaved woman named Joyce Heth. Barnum's outrageous claim that she was 161 years old and had been the personal nurse to George Washington himself. The public flocked to see this supposed link to American history. They paid to listen to her tell fabricated stories and sing hymns. In reality, Heth was likely no older than 80. When she died, public interest was still so high that Barnum staged his final, most grotesque act. He sold tickets to a public autopsy, charging 50 cents a head for a crowd of 1,500 people to watch a surgeon dissect her body on a stage. When the surgeon declared she was only half the age Barnum claimed, the master manipulator simply turned it into more publicity, suggesting he too had been duped, thus generating even more headlines. This was the Barnum formula, a kernel of truth wrapped in a mountain of lies sold with unshakable confidence. He famously declared, "There's a sucker born every minute," and he built an empire proving it. His museum became a factory for creating stars out of human difference. He exhibited the Fiji mermaid, a grotesque creation made by sewing the torso of a monkey onto the tail of a fish. He presented it as a genuine mythological creature, and despite its obvious fakery, the crowds lined up around the block. But Barnum's greatest triumphs were with living performers. He discovered a 4-year-old boy with dwarfism named Charles Stratton. Barnum renamed him General Tom Thumb, taught him to sing, dance, and do celebrity impersonations. He concocted a fake backstory, claiming the boy was an 11-year-old from England to make his small stature seem even more remarkable. Tom Thumb became an international superstar, performing for President Lincoln and Queen Victoria. Barnum orchestrated a lavish, nationally publicized wedding for Tom Thumb to another performer with dwarfism, Lavinia Warren. It was the celebrity event of the century. They were presented as a fairy tale couple, but their lives, their marriage, and even their privacy were meticulously managed and monetized by Barnum. Then there were Chang and Eng Bunker, the conjoined twins from Siam, now modern-day Thailand, from whom the term Siamese twins originated. They were discovered as teenagers and taken on a world tour by a Scottish merchant. They were treated as property, but Chang and Eng were fiercely intelligent and determined. They eventually sued for their freedom, won control of their own careers, and became incredibly successful. They toured on their own terms, settled in North Carolina, bought a plantation, and even owned slaves. They married 2 sisters and between them, fathered 21 children. Their story complicates the simple narrative of victimhood, showing that for some, the platform of the freak show could be a pathway to a strange and complex form of the American dream. But for every story of financial success, there were countless others of pure, unvarnished exploitation. To truly understand the world of the freak show, we have to look past the showman and into the eyes of the performers themselves. What was it like to live a life on display? For many, it was a life of profound loneliness and objectification. Their identities were stripped away and replaced with a stage name and a fabricated story. They were no longer individuals, but the human skeleton, the fat lady, the pinhead, or the dog-faced boy. Their daily reality was the relentless, invasive gaze of the crowd, a mixture of awe, disgust, pity, and ridicule. They were poked, prodded, and measured. Audiences paid extra to ask intrusive questions about their most private bodily functions. This constant dehumanization took an immense psychological toll. Yet, paradoxically, for some, the sideshow offered a strange kind of sanctuary. In a world that had no place for them, a world that would have hidden them away in asylums or left them to starve, the freak show offered a job. It offered a wage, a community of fellow outsiders who understood their experience, and a chance at a life beyond begging or institutionalization. The line between agency and exploitation was often blurry, and it was different for every single performer. Perhaps no story illustrates the depths of this cruelty more than that of Joseph Merrick, forever known as the Elephant Man. Born with a severe congenital disorder that caused enormous, disfiguring growths on his body, Merrick endured a life of unimaginable hardship. After being abandoned by his family and rejected from the workforce, he fell into the hands of a cruel showman who exhibited him in squalid conditions. He was beaten, starved, and treated like an animal. Merrick was eventually rescued by a compassionate surgeon, Dr. Frederick Treves, who gave him refuge at the London hospital. There, for the first time, Merrick was treated with kindness and dignity. He revealed himself to be a sensitive, intelligent, and gentle soul who loved poetry and building model cathedrals. His story, popularized in plays and films, became the ultimate symbol of the freak show's inhumanity, a stark reminder of the gentle spirit trapped inside the monster on display. Equally tragic was the story of Schlitzie, a man with a neurodevelopmental disorder called microcephaly, which resulted in a small skull and brain, and the cognitive function of a small child. Because of his gentle, cheerful demeanor and his customary garment, a simple dress that made bathroom needs easier to manage, he was often billed as female, Schlitzie the Pinhead. He was a star, appearing in Todd Browning's controversial 1932 film Freaks. His fellow performers adored him and cared for him like a child, but Schlitzie had no real control over his own life. He was passed from showman to showman, and when the sideshow business declined, he was unceremoniously committed to a mental institution. He was only saved when a fellow circus performer recognized him years later and arranged for him to live out his final years being cared for by someone from the circus world he considered family. His story highlights the extreme vulnerability of performers with intellectual disabilities, who were entirely dependent on the kindness or cruelty of their handlers. But not all stories ended in tragedy. Myrtle Corbin, billed as the four-legged girl from Texas, was born with a condition called dipigus, which resulted in her having two separate pelvises from the waist down, each with its own pair of legs. She entered the sideshow circuit as a teenager and became a massive star, earning an impressive salary of up to $450 a week. But she didn't let the stage define her entire existence. At age 19, she retired from the business, married a doctor, and went on to have 5 children. She lived a relatively normal, quiet life, proving that the identity forged on the platform didn't have to be a life sentence. Then there were the bearded ladies, women like Annie Jones and Clementine DeLate. In an era with rigid gender roles, they were walking contradictions. On one hand, their beards were the source of their fame and fortune. On the other, their very existence challenged Victorian ideals of femininity. Many of them, like Myrtle Corbin, used their high earnings to achieve a level of financial independence unthinkable for most women of their time. They were both confined by their condition and, in a strange way, liberated by it. The freak show didn't exist in a vacuum. It was deeply intertwined with the scientific and social currents of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The era was obsessed with classification, measurement, and categorization, especially of the human body. Freak shows tapped directly into this obsession, blurring the lines between entertainment and scientific inquiry. Showmen would often partner with doctors and scientists who would examine the performers on stage, lending a veneer of medical legitimacy to the spectacle. They published pamphlets filled with complex medical terminology and anatomical diagrams, reassuring the audience that their gawking was not just morbid curiosity, but an educational pursuit. This pseudoscientific framing was essential. It allowed middle-class audiences to feel morally superior while indulging their basest instincts to stare. They weren't just at a cheap carnival, they were at a living museum, observing nature's anomalies. But this connection to science had a much darker side. The rise of the freak show coincided with the rise of social Darwinism and the eugenics movement. These dangerous ideologies promoted the idea that certain human beings were genetically superior to others. Freak shows became a powerful propaganda tool for these beliefs. By presenting people with physical and cognitive disabilities as evolutionary throwbacks or